Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's security webinar focused on Montgomery County, Maryland. I'm Ron Halber, Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington. Before we begin, you should know this program is being recorded. Also, if you want to access closed captioning, please click on the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. And if there happens to be any members of the press here, please know this is an off-the-record session. The JCRC serves as the public affairs and community relations arm of the Greater Washington area's Jewish community. We represent the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington and more than 100 organizations, synagogues, and schools to advocate for the needs and values of the Jewish community and for the well-being of everyone in the region, including the most vulnerable. The JCRC is focused on government relations, advocating for Israel, combating anti-Semitism, strengthening ties with other communities, working in our region's schools to ensure a welcoming environment for Jewish students and all students, and Holocaust education and commemoration and security. After I introduce our guests, we will hear from the panelists. I will moderate a question and answer session. If you have a question, please enter your name in the question and answers module or in the chat box. Actually, please just do it in the chat box, put your name in the chat box, and I will call on you, and then please unmute yourself. And to get as many questions in as possible, let's please try to be succinct. Our first speaker is Chief Marcus Jones, Police Chief of Montgomery County's Maryland Department of Police, and he's a 35-year veteran of the force. Previously, he served as Assistant Chief of the Investigative Services Bureau, Commander of the 3rd District, Director of Major Crimes, Drug Enforcement Commander, and a variety of other assignments. Chief Jones currently serves on the Maryland Violence Intervention and Prevention Advisory Council, and he formerly served as a board member of the Montgomery County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council. Chief Jones helped to create an award-winning diversity program for the police department. He's an adjunct professor for the Leadership in Police Organizations 3-week training course sponsored by the International Association of Police Chiefs and a former national chairman of the National Black Police Association. Meredith Wiesel currently serves as the Deputy Regional Director at the ADL Washington, D.C. Regional Office. Meredith's operations portfolio includes oversight of the office's legislative advocacy, community engagement, and coalition partnerships, law enforcement training and incident response, and media and communications outreach. Prior to that, she served as Director of Maryland Government and Relations Director at the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington, where she advanced legislative priorities that focused on advocating for strengthening hate crimes laws, confronting and educating about anti-Semitism, securing security funds for houses of worship, schools, and child care centers at risk of hate crimes, and enhancing Holocaust education. She's an experienced attorney and a government relations professional and a friend who has spent decades engaged in public policy and community issues in the Greater Washington area. Robert Graves, our third panelist, joined the Secure Community Network in October of 2019 as Regional Security Advisor for the National Capital Region, encompassing Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Northern Virginia, where he advises Jewish organizations and institutions. In this role, Robert also serves as Director of Security for the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington. Robert brings with him experience and expertise developed over a 35-year career, including 22 years at the FBI, focused on security and counterintelligence matters within the U.S. military, law enforcement, and the intelligence community. Robert came to SCAN from the MITRE Corporation, where he was a program manager and principal advisor for counterintelligence, law enforcement, and cybersecurity for U.S. government clients. I'd like to start today's program with Chief Jones. Chief, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself, and thank you so much, Chief, for joining us. I know that you have a slightly busy schedule.
Just slightly, it's okay. Good evening, Ron, and good evening to everyone, and thank you to the Jewish Community Relations Council for inviting me this evening to have a conversation in regards to safety and security, particularly in the Jewish community. We here at Montgomery County Police have been actively involved, of course, with different acts that have been occurring and working with our fellow law enforcement partners, as well as in communicating with many of the individuals such as Ron. Then Ron was very critical to our discussions about safety here in Montgomery County just a few weeks ago when we had the incident in Texas. Ron reached out to me, and we provided information as we relayed that to our officers who were working at the time to provide the protection and to check on patrols at our synagogues in Montgomery County to maintain safety. Even though we know that this happened many miles away, we know the impact of these incidents that can occur in our communities based upon the history here in the United States. And so it's vitally important for us to be very proactive instead of being reactive in any regards to safety. And it is really the mantra of what I expound upon for our police department to make sure that we are being very, very proactive in most cases in order to be able to prevent any acts of terrorism along the way. So I wanted to just share just briefly, just a synopsis of our department, a little bit about information that we share and information that we want to make sure that you all are aware of as it relates to communication and the lines that we have with JCRC, as well as ADL and other organizations that are vitally important in the security realm. And one thing I want to share is that of all of the 6 districts, police stations that we have that cover our patrol responsibilities for all of Montgomery County, that of course would include those Jewish institutions, religious institutions that we're speaking of this evening and beyond, is that is their primary function, is to be visible at best possible, to check on patrol, and the district commanders are well intact to know the institutions that are in their particular districts, and that they relay and communicate the information to our officers who are patrolling 24/7 during every day of here in Montgomery County. I'd also note that we actively work under the command of our Special Investigations Division, which is headed by Captain Nicholas Paserno. Captain Paserno is responsible for intelligence gathering as well as information sharing with our partners. I know he actively meets with Robert Graves to talk about what's happening in the county as we receive intelligence and share those things, as well as Robert, giving us the courtesy to also provide any security updates, sharing hate crimes reports, as well as bias reports that we have occurring in the community. In fact, I just authorized the release of our bias incidents annual report that will be coming out probably by tomorrow or no later than the end of the week. And I am sad to say that we have had an incredible increase in bias incidents here in Montgomery County. And unfortunately, many of those incidents, in fact, the majority of those incidents are involving, unfortunately, the Jewish religion when it comes to religious type hate or bias incidents. So we have a lot of work to do. And so we still have a lot of work to do in the educational realm and how we actually focus and deal with the bias incidents or the hate crimes and how actively we're involved. The other thing I wanted to also share is that Captain Paserno is also actively involved in working with the FBI and its Office of Partner Engagement to also go over these types of incidents that occur here in Montgomery County, to look at that information actively from a federal standpoint, that see if there is any federal violation of law that the FBI may be interested in actually adopting those any types of cases that we see in response to that. So again, these are the types of incidents that are on our minds and in front of us, and the challenges that we have, and also with us working with our other partners with the FBI with counterterrorism. We actively work with other police agencies as well as Metropolitan Police Department, who of course we share borders with, as well as Prince George's County, and also any other agencies within the Washington metropolitan area that we actually sit down at the chief's table and discuss these types of cases often if there is a trend that is spreading throughout the area. So I wanted to be able to communicate that. I would also share, I think I saw just a brief message in the chat. Our question was, where does that report lie? Well, if you go to Montgomery County's police website, you will find our annual reports that we released on bias and hate crimes that we release annually. So that will that will come out. The previous year reports are already online. And again, if it hasn't already been done, it's probably should be released here really soon about the 2021 report, again, that I found to be very troubling. So I'll pause there and I'll pass it back to Ron, and I'll be available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Chief Jones. Appreciate not only your commitment to our county, your distinguished career, but also of course, your commitment to keeping everybody safe and your relationship with the Jewish community. Meredith, would you like to take your turn speaking now?
Sure. And I did put in the chat for everybody the link to where the bias reports will be for Chief Jones over sitting on my other computer. So it is there. That has up to 2020. And as he said, the 2021 data will be there soon.
Thank you, Meredith.
Of course, I gotcha. So thank you, everybody. It's so nice to see some friendly faces and names. What I want to kind of just do is just take a couple of minutes, talk about some things from ADL's perspective, some of the data, our partnership, working with MCPD, working with Chief Jones, with SCAN, with Robert, and of course the JCRC, my former home. And Montgomery County is also my home, so this is of course near and dear to me, these issues. And so unfortunately, I think we know that being on edge and being vigilant is very much part of the American Jewish experience right now. And in the past few years, anti-Semitism in particular has reached what I would say a high watermark in the United States. And their polls are showing that Americans have become increasingly concerned about anti-Semitism and their own personal and community security, which is a lot of what we're talking about tonight. And this has really become even more true in the aftermath of some of the mass shootings, that we saw at the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, at the synagogue in Poway in 2018 and 2019. Both of those were carried out by white supremacists, but we also saw subsequent attacks on Jewish targets in Jersey City and Muncie. And of course, going all the way back to Charlottesville in 2020 when we had the white supremacist rally. And then, of course, fast forward, unfortunately, to just a few weeks ago, what we saw happen in Colleyville at the synagogue in Texas. And what we've seen is, we've seen this particular surge of dramatic and violent increases of hostilities towards the Jewish community. Just as a way of an example, last year in May, during the Israel and Hamas conflict, we logged 251 anti-Semitic incidents from May 10th, which was the official start of the military action there, through the end of the month. And that was, just for statistics to understand, that was a 115% increase over the same period in 2020. We started seeing violent attacks of Jews in Times Square, in Jewish neighborhoods in Los Angeles, attacks on synagogues and other forms of online harassment. It has just sort of continually been happening. And this is what we would say over the past 5 years has sort of continually increased. And so what I think it's important to understand that the findings sort of reinforce that we need a whole of society approach to combat anti-Semitism, which includes our security measures. And so whether it appears on social media or at a synagogue, it's important that we're continually saying, anti-Semitism, of course, has no place in our communities. And we need our leaders to be, stepping up and talking about this and saying that, there is no place for this, here in our communities and stuff. And, there are a lot of things that I can talk about in questions as to why we're seeing a rise and what are some of the things that we're seeing. But I just want to highlight just a couple of data points, and then I'll kind of wrap up. So just from a national perspective, and then I'll kind of give a little bit of a microcosm, particularly in Montgomery County or in Maryland. And I have, as of now, 2020 data. We will have the 2021 data out in the next few months. But in 2020, there was over 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents throughout the United States. And in Maryland in particular, we saw the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents reported in 2020 than we've ever seen. ADL has been tracking data since like 1979. And in 2020, there were 47 anti-Semitic incidents reported, which was a 135% increase from the previous year. And it was an increase from even the year before. And Maryland across the United States was the 11th highest number of anti-Semitic incidents reported in the country in 2020. Most of that made up was harassment. 11 or so was vandalism, and there was one assault that we actually did record as well. And so what I think it's important just to understand is, from a perspective of security too, is what are we actually dealing with, and where is the community feeling? And 3/4 of American Jews have said they're more concerned about anti-Semitism in the United States now, particularly since last year. And so that's just something that we need to just kind of remember. And honestly, what happened at Congregation Bethel is sort of a painful reminder of the fact that our synagogues in particular, our Jewish institutions, are continuing to be at risk for terrorist type of attacks. And there is no doubt, given what we are continuing to find out, that the hostage taker, he chose his target very carefully there. He didn't go into, somebody said it, I think, in a statement, he didn't go into a PetSmart. He didn't go into, a random other type of retail building. He passed by actually several churches. He went and specifically targeted a synagogue. So we need to know that, look, there's a reminder that there are conspiracy theories that are out there, and conspiratorial anti-Semitism is the core tenet of a lot of the extremists across this perspective, across the spectrum. And it reinforces how much work that we need to do and how much protection that we need in the community. And so, the risk remains high in light of the historic levels of anti-Semitism. We're very proud to collaborate with SCN, with JCRC, with our local law enforcement to provide awareness of the threats that are continuing to emerge. We do the law enforcement trainings about this so that in Montgomery County, since Chief Jones is on here, I do want to highlight, they are next to none. They are incredible with understanding about bias incidents, not just hate crimes under what the hate crime law says. So, we can continue to talk more about this. And I know Robert will probably want to talk a lot about reporting and why it's important to report that. And I can certainly highlight that too about reporting incidents to us. But with that, Ron, I will turn it back to you. And then I think to Robert.
Thank you, Meredith. Robert, you're next.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for having me here tonight. Thanks everybody for joining us. I recognize several names from the chat of organizations that I've worked with over the last 2 years since I've been here. For those that don't know SCN though, let me take a moment and tell you about the organization. SCN, Secure Community Network, was founded in 2004 by Jewish Federations of North America and the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations to ensure that at least the organized Jewish community had access to best practices on security and safety information. About 4 years ago, there was a bit of a policy shift, and SCN began to partner with individual federations around the country to embed security professionals such as myself. Many federations had still have independent security professionals they've hired locally. We work and collaborate with those as well, but right now there are roughly 15, I believe, federations around the country that have, or 15 communities that have an embedded security professional from SCN. So you see me, you'll hear from me, you'll get besieged by emails from me, but I represent a team. There are folks like me with broad and diverse law enforcement, military security experiences around the country. We have an operations center in Chicago, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, around the year, that tracks open source reporting, social media reporting, chatter on the dark web, as well as incident reporting around the country for the Jewish community to highlight trends and areas of concern. If there's a problem we face in our community, I don't know the answer, there's a team of us that do somewhere in there. The services I provide here to our community, thanks to the partnership between SCN and the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, are one, advice and assistance on safety, security, and emergency preparedness measures. I am an embedded security consultant, if you will, in our community, available to any identifiably Jewish, faith-based, not-for-profit organization in our community for the price of a thank you. And actually, you don't even have to thank me. If you like the outcome, I hope you'll thank me. But the most important thing is the resources are there for you as a member of the community, for your organization. Part of that is we do security assessments for the facilities. Last year, we did about 20 assessments for synagogues, day schools, and similar facilities, Jewish facilities around the metro area. And we're on track to do at least that many again this year. We renew these help for the organizations plan, understand their security posture, plan their way forward to improve that posture, and serve as a baseline for application for security grants, both at the federal and state level, as well as the county level here in Montgomery County. We do threat assessments. A rabbi receives a troubling email, a JCC receives a suspicious phone call. We help evaluate that and triage that as we engage our local law enforcement partners and understand what the level of risk is and what kind of actions we need to take to offset that risk as well. We do training. Everything, many of you may have been on the webinar last week where we rolled out the newest block of our situational awareness training, Be Aware. We also do the active threat training, countering active threats, often known to many people as active shooter training. I did one of those for an area congregation just this afternoon in person, and I'll do another one for another group tomorrow night via Zoom. So we're available for that training as well. And we offer other trainings as well. Each Wednesday, I hold a community security call with leaders of community organizations. It's open to all of them, where we talk about a wide variety of topics. Part of that also is we also offer a mass notification system to push out urgent and immediate information across our community. Organizations subscribe to key points of contact to the system, and in an emergency, we push out information, alerts, notifications that are for information the community needs and actions they need to take for safety and security. We'll push that out en masse. We use that same system as our listserv as well to push out more routine notifications of webinars, the Wednesday calls, and the like. I want to take this moment though to highlight 5 key things that each of you can do through your organizations. Number 1, be engaged with your organizational leadership, the professional and lay leadership of your synagogue, your community center, your day schools that your children go to. Get them involved if they're not already actively thinking about their safety, security, and emergency preparedness. First and foremost, if they don't have an assessment, if a security assessment in the facility hasn't been done in the last 3 years, let's get something scheduled and get one done. That's our baseline document. As I said, it gives us a snapshot of our posture today and helps us map a way forward to improvement. Develop a plan, a safety, security, and emergency plan for the organization, for the facility. It runs the gamut of protocols from things as ordinary as their everyday security and visitor management procedures, all the way up through medical emergencies, fire emergencies, and even active threat response or other types of critical incidents. But having a plan and training and informing your membership and staff on the plan are critical measures. Please take advantage of those grant programs. The county grants were just released last week. A number of our organizations around the county benefited from that grant. That'll help them hire off-duty police officers to enhance the security of their facilities. You can apply for the state grant comes up later in the spring that will help with capital improvements, equipment, or other improvements you need to make the facility more safe. And we're about to roll into the federal grant season here in late February or early March. DHS FEMA will release its notice of funding opportunity for the federal nonprofit security grant. That's the big one that we spend a lot of time and energy on every year, getting organizations ready. We've had great success in this community. Our success rate is better than average around the country. Last year, we across the metro area, the National Capital Region, we were able to secure about $3.4 million in federal grant money to help organizations improve their physical plans. But it all begins with having that assessment and developing a plan and applying for the grant. You should always have a relationship with your local police. Chief Jones and his team are huge partners of ours. You'll find your community service officers in your district, as well as Captain Paserno at the Special Investigations Division, who we talk to almost every week. They're great partners in this effort, but let's help them help ourselves in critical emergencies. Make sure they understand your organization, give them a chance to get to know your congregation, your membership, and get to know them as well. Ensure that they have a copy of your floor plans and emergency plans on file. You can also share those with me and I'll keep a backup copy, but it's helpful for the police to have those in an emergency. And then the fifth item is training. I cannot stress this enough. Training is a no cost to low cost security enhancement you can make. By taking advantage of the training I provide, Montgomery County Police can provide you, Department of Homeland Security Protective Service Advisors can also provide you. These trainings on things such as situational awareness and active threat response and other things like stop the bleed and first aid training. These go a long way to help ensuring the safety of your organization by providing skills and resiliency to us as individuals. And from those individuals, we'll build strong, resilient organizations. And from there, a strong and resilient community. As Meredith said, I want to also stress the importance of reporting. If there's an incident, you just don't know whether or not you should notify the police, and you should probably notify the police. If it's an emergency, there's an imminent threat to life or safety of some kind, call 911. If it's not imminent, call the non-emergency number at Montgomery County Police, make a report. Afterwards, please let me know. I'll track the report with the police if there are follow-up actions that we need to take or ways we can enhance their investigation. We'll take care of that, but we also want to track that reporting across our community for trends and patterns that may be of concern to us as well. So please report any suspicious activity. When in doubt, please report it. With that, I want to kick it back to Ron.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate it. And thank you to Chief Jones and Meredith and Robert for your great analysis and thoughts. Folks, it's not often that you get the head of security in our community, somebody with Meredith's expertise, and the chief of police all in one webinar. So I advise you to go ahead and to, as the song says, pump up the volume and go ahead and be prepared to ask any questions you want. There was Chief Jones, there was 2 questions that came in that I think I can combine into one. And one is, what is the highest incident? What is the most highest incident of what? If you can tell us a little bit about the bias report and the highest incidents and how things and any many changes in the report, and are the people who are committing acts of bias, are they coming from people who reside in the county, or are they coming from people outside the county?
So yeah, thank you, Ron. So race and religion are the 2 highest bias incidents that we found in 2021. And generally they lead, I think we had a significant increase in both of those across the county. For example, we had 34 incidents involving religion for the entire county. But out of the 34 incidents, 29 were targeted to the Jewish, were anti-Jewish incidents. So it shows you the magnitude of what we're seeing across the county from that perspective. As it relates to the individuals who commit these offenses, again, understanding that they're bias incidents, in most cases, we may not necessarily identify these individuals. So I don't have exact statistics on whether the individuals are within the county or not, but I would bear to say that we think that majority of people, as relates to anti-Jewish behavior, the information that we get are mostly from those that are from within the county that we've been able to identify. But again, not saying that we have the ability to identify all of these individuals involved in these acts.
Chief, I would open this up to everybody. Here's a question I'd like to pose: is if there is one thing that law enforcement, ADL, and SCAN would like to see the Jewish community do more of to help protect itself, what would it be? Chief Jones.
I think it's what Robert raised, is really just being, it's communicating these incidents and making sure that we're aware of them. I think sometimes people may take some things for granted and may not feel comfortable reporting them out. We want to be made aware of them because it helps us really from a preparation standpoint and understanding what's happening in our community, that it helps all of us to really understand what's happening. So I would stress that from our perspective is that there needs to be a communication that still needs to be pushed out that says that please report these incidents, no matter how slight they may seem.
Meredith, this is one thing you'd like to see members of the Jewish community do to help participate in enhancing their own security, whether individually or at institutions. What would it be?
So I'm actually going to answer it kind of twofold. I think that, so one, I would echo what Chief Jones said, and obviously one of the most important things is reporting, but I also think there needs to be a comprehensive approach to, we have to address anti-Semitic incidents and behavior. And part of that where I think the community can come in place is educating our youth to prevent incidents, particularly a lot of the incidents we see at schools, working directly with law enforcement, as we said, with reporting. And also one of the things that JCRC, I think, and ADL do together is improving our laws that are in place. So being an advocate so that, you know, the community knows what's happening, but our legislators know, so that we can have prevention tactics and things like security funds and stuff. So it's a holistic approach together of several different things to raise awareness of the threats that we're seeing.
Robert, one thing you'd like to see the Jewish community do more of to protect itself?
Ron, thanks for that question. It's great. The simplest answer I can give is be engaged. Be part of the process with your organization. Assist your professional and lay leadership in their efforts to make your organization safer, more secure, and better prepared. And that's taking advantage of all the tools at your disposal, the resources available to you, the training, but it begins with the engagement.
Okay, folks, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? Just please put your name in the chat box and I will be happy to ask your question. While I wait for that, I'm going to go. We have a question from Debbie Ezrin, who's the Executive Director of Temple Beth Ami, my synagogue, I might add. How do we respond to requests from congregants who want training in our synagogue? We'll start probably with Robert, Meredith, and then the Chief, because I probably think falls more within your bailiwick, Robert.
Sure. Thanks for asking that, Debbie. Reach out to me and we will talk about what kinds of training they are most interested in, what's going to best serve your need, what particular constituencies within your congregation have needs. Sometimes we'll do the trainings focused for the early childhood center staff versus the professional staff and the synagogue itself. Sometimes we'll do it for the leadership. We customize all our trainings to the audiences, but it begins with that conversation and you telling us exactly what it is you need and what your concerns are.
Meredith, would you like to comment on that? Or
call Robert. I mean, certainly you could call ADL and we can help facilitate if you don't know how to get in touch with Robert, but he is the one doing the security trainings.
I think Debbie is specifying this is more about people in our worship service, not in our schools. How do we train? Like, what do we make congregants aware of? Chief Jones?
And you know, we support a lot of what Robert does. I mean, the type of training that he provides. But I would also note that I think Robert made a note of this in his presentation, that we have each of our police district stations have community service officers who are assigned to the stations that can come out and do a security assessment of your facility, but also work with your congregants to give them lessons in case of an emergency, as Robert, again, to support what he's doing, but they also provide praise training across the board. And we'd be more than happy to make sure people understand what to do when presented with certain types of situations, what would be the best way in order to have it, to look towards having a successful outcome. So I think that's vitally important that, again, when we look at our security of our locations, knowing our congregants to know where exits are, what is, if something does occur, where they can actually go to safety, having a plan in advance is always better. So when you're always prepared, that will make any experience that much. It will come out, I think, more from a positive standpoint. I raised this as an example when we had the tragic shooting at Magruder High School just a couple of weeks ago. But the plan that MCPS had done, all of the training they had done with their staff was valuable because they followed the playbook perfectly. And that's what you want to be ready in case, and nobody wants to have to live through that, any unfortunate circumstance, but you want to be, knowledgeable just in case that something does happen. You're ready to act and do it in the way in which you've been trained, and training to do it more than just one time, as we probably dreaded the often fire drill that we all went through when we were in school. It's sort of the same premise.
I've got two questions. One directly to me was maybe for Meredith. Can you explain the difference between a hate crime and a bias incident? And what does that mean? And the difference does that mean in terms of criminal and civil law? Because I think people don't understand the terminology. Sometimes they get mixed up. Thanks.
Yeah. So when we say hate crimes and bias incidents, so hate crimes is very specific under federal and state law, meaning what essentially is going to be prosecuted as an actual hate crime. A lot of departments, not all police departments, record things that, particularly like Montgomery County does, as a bias incident, but it may not eventually be prosecuted as a hate crime. It doesn't mean the root of the incident doesn't come from bias, but it may not rise to the level under the statutory aspects of whether it's a federal or a state law, which is why we've worked so hard over the past few years, particularly in Maryland, to continually strengthen the law so that some of these things can be captured more. But you have to remember, a lot of things, just like any other type of criminal aspect, may not be, you have different aspects of murder, different aspects of assault. It's really going to come down to what the evidence is showing and where or not you can show bias in particular. When it comes to civil, one of the things that's pending right now in the Maryland legislature that we've worked on since I was at JCRC and even long before that, is trying to add what's called a civil remedy to the hate crime statute. There are about 46 states, or 40, actually I think it's 47 now, who have criminal laws on the books for hate crimes. There are 33, including the District of Columbia, that allow a civil remedy, which basically means that if a prosecutor couldn't do it beyond a reasonable doubt, in a civil case, which is the preponderance of the evidence, you could potentially then get damages, financial. It could be something for intentional infliction of emotional distress, something that are under what's called tort law. So you could get essentially something that is a bias incident that you can prove, but doesn't necessarily rise to the criminal statute level and stuff. And so that's kind of the big distinction. But it's important from a statistics standpoint to understand what's going on in the community, the way Montgomery County does it. And I'll just keep repeating it. I love that I live here because they do track bias incidents. So we know what's actually happening in the community, not just something that necessarily will be a hate crime under the statutory aspect.
I think what you mentioned about suing civilly was pioneered by the Southern Poverty Law Center, like in the 90s, when they bankrupted the Aryan nations or something for an attack on an African American or an Ethiopian immigrant or something. They went after that and they bankrupted the organization because they couldn't leave. So this idea of a civil remedy is really important because it gives us more flexible tools, not just criminal, but civil, because if we can bankrupt a group, it's another way of shutting them down. Susan, thank you, Meredith. Susan Jerison, a member of the JCRC board, has posed a question to Chief Jones. Chief, given the rise in anti-Semitic incidents, is the police department doing anything differently to address this increase? Have you switched strategies and tactics, or has anything changed?
So one thing I think that I don't know if it's a drastic change, but I think it's something that helps us with really tracking individuals that are responsible for these bias types of incidents that are occurring, particularly around the anti-Semitic incidents that we have, is that we go and our detectives actually will follow up. We'll actually interview, and we assign these cases out to our officers in our community engagement division so that they can actually do a little bit of follow up to see what is actually the intent, what is actually this individual's mindset when we, again, not that they may have done anything criminal, but it allows us to at least do an interview that says that we've got you on our radar. Because if anything that you do then transposes into a crime, and that we can really kind of show that you've had some intent, or at least this has been on your mind, that you've been doing something that prior to the criminal act itself. So it allows us to be able to at least monitor and document cases that we've had where individuals, even though that there was not a crime committed, but it allows us to have some sort of a starting point from an investigative standpoint that we can always fall back on.
Thank you, Chief. Diane Neiman, who is the executive director of Temple Beth and Me, where I got married, and where my in-laws, my mother and my father belonged for a long time, for their whole lives, have read. She just posed the question. I've read that there is some controversy around an opening statement at services pointing out exits. What is your opinion? Diane, can you elaborate a little bit on that? What's been the, if you want to unmute yourself, what's been the issue around it?
I think that people just feel like it's revealing too much to some people that might be in the sanctuary. It went around on one of my listservs. There wasn't a specific issue. It was just, we don't like to do it. We don't like to point out our security information, where the exits are, what to do. And I don't understand why you wouldn't want to have the clergy make an announcement at the beginning of services. I just don't, but maybe I'm missing something.
That's interesting. Chief Jones,
I can try to find the thread. I can try to find the thread and send it to you, Ron.
Sure. Does anybody want to comment on that? Is there any danger in announcing at the beginning?
I'd like to jump in there, Ron.
Please.
Diane, I don't see an issue with making a safety announcement at the start of any event in any public space, pointing out where the emergency exits are. If you wanted to go so far as to point out what things like fire extinguishers and first aid kits are, or, and I saw your note in the chat, a little placard, a little one-page laminated thing in the back of the pews, kind of like we have on airplanes, right? It's the same idea. You have the safety information there for what everybody is talking about. Now, there may be greater details that you don't necessarily want to share in that venue, but basic things like where are the emergency exits, where the first aid equipment in emergency, those kinds of things. I think that's very, very important to share. Goes to our duty of care for our guests, whether they're congregants or visitors or whomever. That's really basic stuff. I don't see a problem with that. As I said, there may be other things that we don't want to share in that manner, but some of that basic stuff is probably a good idea, very helpful for a lot of people.
I think so too. I agree with you, and I'll try to find the thread. It was either NASE or NADA. I don't remember which one, but I'll try to find it and let you guys see it.
Meredith, there's a question from Johnny Schuchart about the Muslim community that you just indicated to me privately that you would like to answer. Can you please answer that question from Johnny?
Sure. So I'm not sure how far back, Johnny, that you're looking at and stuff, but what I can tell you is, so according to the FBI's hate crime data, when they look at everything, whether it's race-based, religion-based and stuff, the incidents, I'm looking at my other screen because I just pulled up some of the data. So reported hate crimes targeting the Jewish community actually made up 60% of all religion-based hate crimes. And that has actually consistently been happening. So yes, the Muslim community has definitely faced a lot of Islamophobia over the years and stuff, but the religion-based crimes particularly has been much higher against the Jewish community. And that has actually consistently been happening and the latest report says for the third straight year, actually, that religion-based crimes against the Jewish community. So look, any hate wherever we see it is bad. We of course want to condemn it no matter what. And there are definitely been times where we saw, particularly after 9/11, when there were, certain mosques that were being attacked or threatened or vandalized. And we do consistently still see that and certainly in some communities and stuff. That, and you said, what can the Jewish community take away? I'm not sure what you meant by that, but I think where a lot of this comes in is allyship, for all of our faith-based institutions. And anytime, we see an attack against any faith-based type of institution, we should all be there to support it. And the one thing, my synagogue, Shari Torah, where I go, several years back, actually even long before I worked at JCRC, was vandalized. I happened to be the person who found it when it happened, it was a real traumatic thing for me. That night we had an incredible community vigil with the churches, the mosques, the imams came, the priests came, the reverends from all over. Colleyville had the same thing. And I think that what we just need to realize is that any attack against any faith is an attack against faith and religion in general. And so I hope that kind of answers the question I think that you were getting at.
Larry Hirschman, thank you, Meredith. Larry Hirschman asked the question, is there a central clearinghouse for all the security information available from SCAN, Federation, Department of Homeland Security, FBI, and police departments? Because I can understand that if you're on the receiving end of all this, it could be overwhelming. So how do you suggest, is there one source or that one person or one place to go? What would you suggest for Jewish institutions to look? Where should representatives who do security in the Jewish community direct their focus?
Ron, if I could take that one, at least to start. I wish I could say there was one place to go and you could get answers. We do our best to curate as much of that from different sources and put on the Federation's website on the security page there. It's predominantly SCN information, but much of that is pulled from other resources such as DHS, FBI, and our law enforcement partners. But we do have some other products there. That is the closest I can say to a one-stop shop, but there's not really one. But you should, as I said, we're constantly on the lookout for good, relevant products that'll be useful to the community, and we try to post them there on a regular basis.
Thank you, Rob. I just got a private question. Chief Jones, where do you see most of the incidents in the county occurring? Is there a location? Is there a certain area?
So our primary, our two top areas that are leaders of bias incidents are basically our second district, which is also known as the Bethesda district, which covers Bethesda, a large part of Potomac, and North Bethesda. Second, that comes right behind it is the Silver Spring district that really covers pretty much the, from the DC line all the way up that borders Prince George's County, all the way up through Burtonsville. But the majority of those incidents we see are really in the lower Silver Spring corridor that we truly know as Silver Spring. So those are your two top areas, and really not far behind are also your Rockville and the Wheaton districts that are close behind with these types of incidents. So it just kind of to show you that it's really spread out throughout the county, but I just wanted to point out what were some of the highest areas of these incidents.
Have you deployed additional resources and assets in those areas to deal with that?
So generally, again, if you look at the, for example, the third and the fourth district, which is Silver Spring and Wheaton, those are your highest calls of volume. So we really kind of focus our patrol units really based upon calls for service and the demands that we have. And so those become your highest, but we will put extra patrols in those areas where we get any incident, where we see a trend that's occurring, whether it's, even if it's just a point that we know that somebody is dropping leaflets, for example, in a particular area, we will add additional patrols in those areas and provide extra resources if need be, depending upon what happens. So we always are monitoring, and these are the jobs of the commanders that they actually will reallocate resources when needed.
So I'm going to stop for a second and just give everybody like a 2-minute overview about what their JCRC does with security and about how you access money. and then we'll come back and wrap up with any questions. So many of you know that the National Security Grant Program is a federal program, which was really pioneered by the Federation over 20 years ago. It was one of the first things I did when I became director locally, was working on this program, which hands out really, and it's gone through several incarnations, several times. Sometimes you've needed to have a match, sometimes you haven't. It's generally been in the $100,000 to $150,000 range, and really it's mostly for capital items. I mean, you can use it for security, but if you're using it for security, for operating to provide for security, it has to be federally bid, and since most and so that maybe you can do that in terms of you're hiring an individual director of security for your facility, but if you're hiring, like most institutions, off-duty police, it really doesn't lend itself to that. And it's important that this grant program be continually renewed because equipment becomes obsolete, new technologies emerge, and things just have to generally be replaced. There are 3 grant programs at the state level. The Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services has a Protecting Against Hate Crimes grant program, which is currently fund. Sometimes use that for op. If you do it's one time, and it's mostly geared towards capital, as are most of these programs. The Maryland Center for School Safety, as you could understand, it's mostly for non-public schools. And the third one is the Department of Housing and Community Development has a facility-related safety improvement program, which is mostly for $25,000 to do things that could either be almost for beautification, but also can be for facilities improvement. So like Debbie Ezra and I were talking about a certain matter like shrubbery and things like that at Temple Beth Ami. You can make certain modifications to those programs. The Montgomery County program that you heard released, that I had the honor of speaking at with Chief Jones at a press conference last Thursday, with the county executive, was a program pioneered by the JCRC. 2 years ago, we started it right before the pandemic, and it culminated in 44 Jewish institutions receiving 74% of the $700,000 available in this program. This program was distinctly created to fulfill a gap, to make sure that there were a flexible, innovative, and local program where Jewish institutions and congregations can get a direct check from Montgomery County to hire off-duty police officers to protect their institutions during times of high usage. You can also use it for training. But the idea behind it was, as far as we know, we're the first county in the United States to do that. I'm working and advocating with the county executive to raise that amount to $1 million, and JCRC is hoping to replicate this program in DC and in Fairfax and throughout the country. If you have any questions about the federal grant program, Robert Graves is your man to go. If you have any questions about state and local money, you should reach out to Debbie Miller, and Debbie and Robert will work together on the application, because Robert provides a lot of technical knowledge. Deborah understands a lot of the process of securing the money, and we do this as a team. So you should know that while there's 3 people on this phone call who are employed in the 3 organizations that work in the Jewish community in security, SCAN, ADL, and JCRC, there is a ton of partnership, and we speak to each other all the time. And you should know that there's, we're all friends, we all get together, we all talk to each other all the time, and it's a wonderful partnership. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's any last questions. So Meredith put the URJ and the conservative movement's background for responding to anti-Semitic incidents at synagogues. Are there any
synagogue can really use either of them? Those are just 2 that were co-branded in the past 2 weeks with URJ and USCJ, but they're for everybody. We're working with the OU as well.
It is now 77:56, and I'm a big believer of ending calls on time. Does anybody have any questions? You have direct access to the police chief of Montgomery County and 2 of the most respected people in our community who are engaged in this, Meredith and Robert. So please ask your question. Let me know if you have a question. Okay, with no questions, I see, thank you, Diana, I appreciate it. The JCRC will continue to be having webinars available. We're doing one for DC on February 9th, and February 9th, and I think it's the 17th in Virginia for each community. We also, in addition to having a fabulous relationship with Chief Jones, we also have a terrific relationship with Chief Conte in DC and with Chief Davis in Fairfax. And I think it's also important to know that there's a lot of, when I work with my colleagues at other JCRCs around the country, they are jealous of what we have here. I mean, not only do we have great Jewish community professionals, but we have amazing law enforcement that get it. They are very, very sensitive. This is not the case all over the country, folks. You got to understand this. We're very privileged. Call your friends in other communities and they'll tell you, I called the cops, they weren't responsive, blah, blah, blah. Or I called ADM. In this, I called, this. In this region, we have a fantastic scan professional. You don't get somebody of Robert Graves' background randomly. We're very lucky. Or Meredith, who really is fantastic. And Chief Jones with his distinguished law enforcement career and his sensitivity to our concerns. So on that note, I just want you to say that everybody on this call is publicly available. I'm sorry, Marion just asked me a quick question, but I meant other. Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry. We'll ask a quick question. I apologize. Marcus, I'm sorry, Chief Jones. Is there a prototype of the person who's committing these bias offenses? Are they young? Are they older? Are they men? Are they women? Is there a certain characteristic or background, or that sort of provides a certain individual provides the majority of those who are committing bias or hate crime incidents, or is it all over the place?
Yeah, I mean, if it's from a racial standpoint, the majority of the offenders are white, but from age description, it's really more. The majority of individuals are more of anywhere from 18 to 45. So there's really no specific group when we look at some of the incidents in which we reported.
But you're saying they're mostly adult white males.
But they're mostly adult white males is mostly what we have. Yes.
Right, Meredith, that tracks with around the country, correct? Same thing, mostly.
Depends on the community. It's hard to say. I mean, it depends on the incident. I don't know that I could answer that in a larger scale. Yeah.
And the other, somebody just followed up, and then we're going to end. Is that usually, do these individuals have other criminal backgrounds, or is it just is this the first time you arrest them with a hateful incident?
Yeah, I mean, it could be a mix of both. From that perspective, that's hard to say as well.
Okay, well, on that note, I wanted to say, Chief Jones, Robert, and Meredith, thank you so much for giving us your time. Thank you to everybody who's joining us on this call. I hope we found it useful. If you did, great. If you didn't, I'm sorry. If there's a way to improve it, email me. At JCRC, we hear from everybody all the time. There's never a lack of opinions that come in. Thank you, Rabbi Mark Israel, for joining us as well. And stay tuned. And remember, everybody is very accessible to you if you need to. And we appreciate you all joining us here this evening. Have a good night and stay safe and be well, everybody.